net out there for volleyball or badminton. Somebody gave them a nice big badminton set, and they used it all the time. They enjoyed that. And so they'd also go out in the backyard to sunbathe. But I had rules on that one. Tank tops and shorts or a bathing suit.
I just remembered I'm going to have to excuse myself for a second and go make...
Timestamp is being put on now.
Hello, I'm Lulu Rowan. I was the matron here at the Idaho State Penitentiary from 1961 to 67. And Mr. Clapp hired me at that time, and he hired me because of my experience in nursing. He felt that I could keep the women from malingering, and then I could take care of the ones who had medical problems but were not hospital cases. He also and that was why I was hired here. Now, I am an LPN, and as such, I want you to come to me with your medical problems. As of today, there will be no one who goes into the inside inmate hospital. I realize why you want to go there, but as of today, that's taboo, no more. And so consequently, when you have sore throats, earache, or such, tell me about it. If I can't take care of it, I'll get the doctor to. If he can't take care of it, I'll take you to the emergency room at St. Luke's Hospital. And after I told him that, nothing was ever bothered about it again. Now, I was here about 3 months when the girls came to me and asked me if they could call me Mrs. R. Because I said, yes, but why? And they said, well, because Mrs. R sounds so, and they hummed and hawed a bit. And then they said, it sounds so dull. I said, all right, but remember, please do not take advantage of my having given you the privilege of calling me Mrs. R, for the simple reason it can be removed as quickly as I gave it. And they said, oh, we won't do nothing like that. And apparently they didn't. 10 years later, I got a letter from my cousin, who happened to be the educational officer at Alderson's Federal Women's Prison. And when she went through went through her records as she was admitting her, she said, oh, I see you from Idaho State Penitentiary. She says, I spent time there. But she said, well, I have a cousin who works there. And she said, what's her name? And she said, Lulu Rowan. And she said, oh, that's Mrs. R. Now, this was 10 years later, back in West Virginia. So anyway, that's how come I was called Mrs. R. And they seemed to hold it as a title of respect for me. Now, every day the girls I unlocked the cell doors at 8 o'clock when I came in. And their routine was the first ones out would go to the bathroom where they had their only little bathroom sink. And that's where they washed their face and hands and brushed their teeth early in the morning. I want to go over that again. I want to go over that part again, please. The routine.
Start again at the
Yeah. Yeah, the typical routine day was I would come in at 8 o'clock in the morning, unlock the cells for the women, and the first ones to go to the bathroom, we had the bathroom and there was only the one small sink like we have in our own bathrooms, and they would go there and wash their face and hands and brush their teeth. And the first ones to do that were the two that were assigned to the kitchen duty. Now the kitchen girls, they had all the responsibility of all the cooking and cleaning in the kitchen, and also of making up a grocery list for the next week. Then the next girls who went into this thing, they set the table, and then the rest of them by and large, the rest of them finally got through. And they would probably, half the time, would go into their cells and start cleaning and seeing that everything was in ship-shape. And so that was the start. Now, I had, all my girls worked. Now, some of them were, I had 2 girls who were especially good ironers. Now, those 2 girls washed and ironed all of the shirts for the parole board officers. And there was anywhere from 15 to 25 shirts every week. And they got 15 cents a shirt for a long sleeve shirt and 10 cents a shirt for a short sleeve shirt. And then the other people who were here did not have, everyone had an account open for them. But if they didn't have money, they didn't have anything in their account. They had to depend on family and on friends and other ways of getting money in here, their account. They did their fancy work, like one girl did sweaters continually. I don't know how many she knit while she was in here, but she knit an awful lot, and she'd send them to her boyfriend. And he would keep some, and he would also sell them and send the money to her account. So they always ask, what do the girls do with their money? What do they do in here with their money? I said, they have all kinds of crafts. Some knit, some crochet, and some do other kinds of crafts. I said, they're busy all the time. And I said, the girls here have to keep their cells immaculate. Nothing laying around. Everything has a place, and it has to be in its place. And then every day, the cells and the whole house has to be dust mopped, the floors, has to be dust mopped and dry and wet mopped every day. And so they do very well. They all work together. And now when they got through, after lunch, around 1 o'clock, everything was done. And they were able to come out into the yard or do as they pleased for the whole afternoon. Lots of them there's a couple of girls who like to come out and mow the lawns. So they mowed the lawns, and these were big lawns. There's twice as much lawn in the back as there is out here. And then other girls like to do the flower beds, so they do that. And then when they got through with the flower beds, why, some of them like to go out and...
Is that pounding showing?
Okay.
Are we rolling?
Okay.
You were talking about how they
Yes.
spent time in the
Time
yard.
out here in the yard. They enjoyed it being out here. And as I said, I told them when they go to do their sunbathing, it was tank tops and shorts or a bathing suit. The trustees' dormitory was the top floor of the floor over across the wall, and the trustees had a habit of going up onto the roof and looking over to see what they could see. So I didn't give them anything but just arms and legs and a head to look at. So they finished. They didn't care about that very long. And then when I went home at 5 o'clock in the evening, and I would lock the big steel door here, this one. And then, of course, I would lock the outside door. But they were in complete freedom inside. Their cells were open, and they were in complete freedom. So then when between 8 and 9:30 at night, 2 guards would come over, and they would lock up the women. One would stand in the doorway, and the other one would lock the women who were assigned to cells. And so then they were locked up until I came again the next morning. Now, when a new girl came in, a new inmate came to the institution, she had to be locked up for 10 days. And this was for medical, and until she got her medical and physical exams done. And so I told her when she got in her cell, I said, now listen, I do not want you to listen to what people say about me. I said, you'll be in this cell for 10 days. You listen to everything that goes on. You listen to how they react to me, how I talk to them, etc. And I said, when you get out of that cell, you should know your own opinion of what I am like. And I never had any problems with them after I started doing that. In fact, one day, one of the girls started telling a story that she had told before about me. And this party said, look, I've been listening to that story for the last 10 days, so I don't want to hear it anymore. And so that woman didn't tell those stories anymore. And it kind of cut down on the stories that were told. They were kind of derogatory. It didn't make any difference to me, but that's beside the point. It gives other people kind of bad ideas. Now, the women who had money, how they earned money was the girls who had the shirts laundry. Now, they were the only one who got money from the institution, because that money was from the shirt laundry was put into their account. And as I say, I had 2 of the girls, and I alternated 1 month with one and 1 month with the other. Now, as I say, all the girls worked. When it came springtime and time for picking berries, why, I would take a group of girls, and I would take them down to Eagle Island Farm. And we had approximately an acre of raspberries down there, and so that's where we picked the raspberries. And then we had our lunch, and if there was anything else to be picked after that, why, then we would pick that. And later on in the evening, after we left the island, why, the other trustees that worked there would bring up our produce, our berries and such, take them inside the yard to the inside cannery, and that would be taken care of there. Now, the next day probably, or the day after, I would take another group of people to go down to where the Warm Springs Golf Course is now. And that was our main produce area. So we had every kind of produce down there you would want. Peas and beans and squash and tomatoes and cucumbers, etc. And we'd pick down there for 3 or 4 hours, and then the guard would come and get us, and we'd come back home. Now, this is another thing that they say about, why did you ever carry weapons? I said, no one in the whole penitentiary ever carried a weapon. No guard, and I did not. The only weapons that were here at the penitentiary were the rifles that were in the 6 towers that covered the whole institution. Now, the 2 on the towers on this corner and that corner were the ones, that was 1 and 2 towers. They took care of over here and up on the hillside and all that sort of thing. So we did not have any, and the women, they did not make any kind of a weapon either, for the simple reason. Whoa. Why should they make weapons when they had a kitchen full and everybody could avail themselves of something in the kitchen? There was sharp knives, there was dull knives. They could have done anything. Forks, you make a heck of a weapon with a fork, but we did not have any of that. And then in 1962, see, I worked here from 61 till 62, and then in 62, they put in closed-circuit television, and our camera was right above the door, in a can right above the door, and everybody was under surveillance 24 hours a day from then on. And of course, I was too, from the time I came and unlocked the girls. And then I was also, then they were under surveillance when I locked the door and left for home. There was no, and if anything was gone wrong in there, the lady who was out in the day room all the time, she would make an emotion of something like this and make a hurry kind of a motion. Come on, like quick. And they'd send a couple of guards over from inside the yard to find out what was wrong. They would see things on the TV, but it still didn't say what was wrong with someone that might be in one of the cells. So they'd send a couple of guards over to find out what was wrong. And if it was anything medical, why, then they called me. But during my 6 years, I never had to come up after I was off duty. I had conversations, and I had told the guards what they could do and how they could tell the lady in here, and she would do what had to be done. Now, The most that I had, I say, was 20. Okay, and their crimes were from bad checks, 3 years, grand larceny, forgery, day and nighttime robbery. Those were all 5-year sentences. And then came a voluntary manslaughter and involuntary manslaughter. I had 2 voluntary manslaughter and 3 involuntary manslaughters. And of those people, now they have suggested that I try to explain the difference between voluntary and involuntary, especially to my students. And now involuntary manslaughter is when something happens that you kill someone you don't really mean to, but like when you have an accident on the road and so you hit some car and somebody is killed in that car, and unless there's some very good reasons for them not to be charged, they involuntarily will be charged with involuntary manslaughter and receive a 10-year sentence. Now, voluntary manslaughter is when they happen to be in the vicinity where a crime was committed. For instance, there was a crime committed here in Idaho, and there was a black man, a Mexican, and a white man, and 2 white girls. And the black man had planned this robbery for a long, long time. And so the white man went to the car and got the gun and went back and gave it to the Mexican. Now, the girls knew that their goose was cooked when that man came and got a gun. Anything could happen. So when the constable, they called him, came to look, to do his rounds, the black man said to the Mexican, shoot him, and he did. Now, the 2 men, the black man got 30 years. The other 2 got 15 each. One for going and getting the gun and being present, and the other one for pulling the trigger, even though it was under arrest. He was scared to death, that black man. And the 2 girls were sitting back in the car, but they got voluntary manslaughter because they voluntarily were in that crowd. So that's the difference between the 2. And I hope it helps somebody. As you go along in life, I hope it helps. Now, I had people, as I said, and I also for murder. And my lady who was in here for murder was a lady, when she was, I think she was about 36, she had a girl 16 and a girl 11 and a girl 9. Well, she killed her husband by putting strychnine on his hamburger. And so consequently, they put her in, what she thought, she just got rid of him, And that way she could have the farm and the money, and she and the girls could have a good life. But she didn't stop and think Mama was the one that's going to get life. And so she had life in here. And when I came to work here, she had been here approximately 9 years, and she was coming out of it. She was just really coming out of her insanity. But she still had a few odd quirks. And so consequently, she came to me one day and she said, Mrs. R., I'm nobody. I said, yes, you are. You're somebody. No, I'm a body. I am here. I do my chores. I do what I'm supposed to do, but I'm not with them and they're not with me. So I thought, this needs a little rehab. She's just on the verge of getting better. So I did a very small rehab. I told her that after the girls were locked up at night, if she would do me the favor, if someone had a headache, a bad headache, that, and even their cellmate would tell her that that was a bad headache, she could give them 2 aspirin. And I wanted her to put down on a piece of paper the date, who it was, and what kind of that she had a headache, and you gave 2 aspirin at the time you gave the 2 aspirin. Okay, she did that very well for a month or so, and then I decided, well, I'll do a little more. I said, I'm going to give you another little chore. I said, will you please take care of the thermometer? I said, I taught her how to sterilize the thermometer, and then I said, when somebody after lockup has nausea or vomiting or has a very high fever and her cellmate even concurs, I said, you can shake the thermometer down, give it to the cellmate, and she will take the temperature and give it back to you. I said, then I will say, put it down again like I told you, the date and the person's name and what seemed to be wrong with her, fever and nausea, and then how much her temperature was and when you took it. And if it's 100, don't bother about doing anything about it. It will be all right. But I said, in an hour or later, you can take her temperature again. And she said, and I said, when you take the temperature again, I said, do the same thing routine. And if it happens to be if it happens to be 102, then you can give her 2 aspirin. And so I said, then she'll be all right till the next morning. So that's what I did with this lady. And you know, when she was here for 13 years and 4 months, Mr. Clapp sent her over to Blackfoot for reevaluation. And she was supposed to be gone 3 days. She came back the next day. And when she came back, she was so excited and she was smiling from ear to ear. And she handed Mr. Clapp this envelope. And he said, well, what did they say? She said, I'm sane. He said, oh, I knew you were. We had known she was sane for a couple of years, but they wanted to make sure it was going to stay stable and not have any problems. And so that's what, she went from here to Seattle on parole. She's on lifetime parole. And she went from here to Seattle. She's going to stay with her aunt, her mother's only living sister. And so consequently, she only stayed with her a couple of days because she found an ad in the paper that said that they wanted a housekeeper. This gentleman was in his early 80s, and he was selling all his property in Seattle. And he wanted her to keep the house in proper shape, keep it nice and clean, and keep him taken care of with his laundry and so forth, his cooking. And so then he paid her $250 a month in her board and room. And so consequently, she saved every bit of that. And when she saved every bit of that, and she didn't have to work anymore for him, and he was all ready to go, he gave a nice report to her parole officer. And this is what I understand. I kind of heard that around about way. And then she had money. The first time she'd had money in her hands in 20 years. Her husband never let her have any money. And so consequently, she took that money, got her rented a nice apartment, and then she went to this hospital that was having the LPN training. That's all she wanted to do was be a nurse. I wonder where she got the idea. But that's what she wanted to do. And she became an LPN, got her license in Washington, and went to work for that same hospital. And so consequently, she worked there for many years. Now, this woman would be approximately 70 years old right now. And she may not be working in a hospital or a nursing home, but I'll bet you she's doing care like home care or taking care of elderly. So that's my one proud story I have to tell. I have others that I can remember. Now, I'm going to ask a question. Do you want me to tell one or two of these stories? They can cut them, they can delete them or not. I had another girl who went from here. She was in here on a bad check charge. She had bought a fifth of whiskey so she could have whiskey after she got home at evening. And that bounced. So consequently, she was caught. And I think the reason she was caught, but because of her name, and she was a court clerk in one of the courts downtown. And so consequently, that didn't sit too well, you know. And her father-in-law was a very well-known man in Emmett. Anyway, this girl got out, and when she came in here, she was a liar. And I said, I'm going to stop you from lying. I said, you're too bright. You have too much brains. I said, you're too pretty, and you're not going to lie when you get out of here. And I'm going to stop you. And I said, I'll stop you. And I could hear her any place in the house talking to anybody. And if she was telling a lie and I knew it, I said, Anna? Yes, Mrs. R. And by the time she left here in 10 months, she no longer lied. And I meant it. And she didn't swear, she didn't lie, she was a nice lady. And she went to Spokane, went to Kinman Business University, and graduated the third from the top in her class. And so she set up a books for Alcoholics Anonymous. And she thought she was an alcoholic still. And so consequently, after she'd been there for a while, her daughter came from here and came up to her. She was about 12 years old, and she said her daddy had did bad things to her. So she took her to the doctors the next day, and it was proven that she had been sexually molested. So she said, well, I have to find something else I got to do. I can't just do this because it doesn't pay me enough money. So she went to LPN school and worked a year, and went to RN school, worked a year, and then she went to Cheney, Washington, the University of Washington in Cheney, and got her master's degree in nursing. And then about, I guess about it was in June, I believe, she called me and she said, Mrs. R., will you come to my wedding? I said, you couldn't keep me away. And when I was there, several of her guests asked if I was her mother. I said, no, I'm just a good friend. And Anna would come up and say, she's my best friend. But it was nice. And so anyway, this is what happened to Anna. And I said one thing, she said, I've got something to tell you. And I said, oh, you have? And I said, when reception was over, I said, what you got to tell me? She said, well, Mrs. R., everything's been paid for. The curriculum has been fixed out like I want it. All I have to do is make my appearance at the University of Washington at Pullman to get her PhD. Now that's over 20 years ago, and I'm sure she has her PhD. And I'm very sure I really think she even has her pardon, because she had to have a pardon to get bonded, you know. And so I had one of my girls already had been, had already gotten a pardon. She did not get a chance to use her pardon. I mean, she did not get a chance to do what she was going to. She was going to go to veterinary school, but she didn't get to because she was injured in an automobile accident. But anyway, this girl, I'm sure she's where she wanted to be. But she kept saying all the time she was an alcoholic. And the man she married, his ex-wife had been an alcoholic. She was dead, but she was a bad alcoholic. So those two are two nice things. You can't get down so deep. I keep telling the kids, you don't get down the ditch so deep that you can't get up and shake yourself off and make higher plans. Get up higher. Don't get up and have troubles again. Now, the women who had the health problems, the girls ranged from 18 to 75, past 75. And the girl was one of them who had a health problem was the one that was over 75. She was an insulin-dependent diabetic. And she, every once in a while, would get a little bit too much insulin, and she'd have an insulin reaction. So I just put her one side, and I fed her orange juice with heaping spoons of sugar in it. And it would take anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes before she would come out of her reaction. And she'd be weak for a while, but she'd be fine. And then she'd be fine till the next day. Then the next one I had was an epileptic. And she was an Indian girl from Nez Perce Reservation up at Kamiah or Lapwai, I don't know which. And she could throw herself into a seizure by becoming angry. And I know what anger can do. So she would get angry, and for an Indian to turn red, she would just get as red in the face as she could be, and she almost looked like her face was swelling when she was almost ready for her seizure. And if she come across a chair, she'd kick the chair, and she'd use the most terrible language you ever heard. And some of it might have been Indian, but the rest of it was foul. And, you know, I'd say, I think it's about time, your seizure's about here. I think it's about time you lay down, don't you? I said, better lay down than stand up, isn't it? And she said, yes. She had a very deep voice. And so she'd lay down and have her seizure. And right after her seizure, she'd automatically fall asleep. And she'd sleep about 2 to 3 hours. And when she got up, she was no more that person that I put in that cell than she was her old self, a nice, quiet, young woman of Indian descent. And so consequently, that was my second one. The third one was the one that worried me. She came in here, and she had 2 commissurotomies. Now, commissurotomy means the first kind of a heart clean out or what have you. They used to call it scraping the valves. and then it was all done by tubes, etc. And that was the first type of heart surgery they ever did. And she had 2 of them. But nobody told me she had periods of apnea. And one morning after breakfast, she was sitting in her chair, and one of the girls said, Mrs. R., Mrs. R. And I looked around, and this lady was not breathing, and she was blue. And I went over and I kind of slapped her on the face about like that. I said, come on, honey, let's get up. And she goes, and then I'd get her up and walk her out here. I'd have to almost carry her out here. And I said, now let's take some deep breath. And the first thing you know, she I said, wait a minute, let's slow down. Easy. Now, in and out. And we did that all the way. We went very slowly all the way around the house and came back here. I said, now how do you feel? I feel fine, but I'm tired. And so she'd lay down for a little while. Now, these were the people who had to be taken care of. And they were not, now the girl who had apnea, she could have died in any of those periods of apnea, because if she didn't get a breath, if she just went on not breathing, she could have. But that's why I was here, to take care of her. And another thing, I had 3 women who came in here who were pregnant when they came in. One woman had a baby boy, and she did not have anyone to put the baby to. So consequently, she put the baby in the children's home. It used to be on Warm Springs Avenue. There used to be a children's home there. And they called me, and I told her the message. They could not let the baby be adopted because the baby had a heart murmur. And they would keep it until she got out, and then she could take it home. And that's what she did. I had a little Mexican girl in here. She had a little baby girl. And oh, what she did to that baby girl. She named her Dorothy Clare, and that was 2 of my orneriest people in here. They weren't ornery to me, but they just weren't nice as the rest of the girls are. And so consequently, she asked if I would make arrangements for the baby to be baptized, and then her mama would take her home to Idaho Falls. So I made all the arrangements, and I'm her godmother, even if it's Dorothy Clare. And she took the baby. I took her to the bath. Father Walsh was Monsignor Walsh at the time, and he came right from Colombia, so he spoke Spanish like a native. And when she spoke to him and he uttered the very first words in Spanish, her eyes lit up like she was going to be able to talk to somebody, because she didn't talk very well. And so they had quite a conversation until I had to tell him, it's time for me to take her to the bus. So I took her to the bus so she could take the baby home. And then the other one was a lady who weighed about 250 pounds, a 5'10", and she had twins, a boy and a girl. And that poor little boy, he was the first one born. He was the ugliest little old face I ever laid my eyes on. And I love new babies. They're so pretty. They're so nice. Anyway, about 6 months later, she got pictures of the twins. And they were pretty babies. And that little boy looked so good. He was a pretty baby, too. So anyway, that's the ones that had their babies in prison. Now, I would take them to St. Luke's Hospital, and I was with them during the delivery and when the babies went to the nursery. And then I stayed with them for a half hour or so until they were okay. Then I'd come back to the ward and give all the girls the information. And now it says here about people who had visitors. Lacey had visitors when she had been here 9 years. That was the one that was in here for murder. And her daughter was here, and she said, had been married, and she said she never wanted to, she didn't have a mother anymore. The girls didn't have a mother anymore. And so consequently, she didn't want her anywhere around the children or anything. And I have felt very sorry for those people for the simple reason their mother turned out to be a very wonderful woman. And the only other ones was, I think Barbara, the one that had the twins, had a couple of visits from the man that was the father of her twins. And then I believe that's it. As far as they didn't have many visitors, not many visitors at all. Very few for the women that were in here. Anna didn't have any. The girl who went to Spokane, she didn't have any. The girl who was going to be a vet, she didn't have any. I don't think there was very many in here who had. Their people were far away. These girls were from all over the state. And so they come from Idaho Falls and up in the northern part of the state and all over the eastern part. Idaho Falls had an awful lot of them. Lewiston had some. I had from everywhere. But that is just about what happened during the daytime and what happened with the women in the ward. Now, I had already told you about the men coming and locking them up, didn't I? Because I did. No, I didn't. Between 8 and 9:30 at night, 2 guards would come over. One would stand in the doorway, and the other one would lock the girls in their assigned cells. So I did miss that one. And that was what happened. And then, from then on, the girls were still under supervision of the turnkeys. There was turnkeys 24 hours a day, 3 shifts of turnkeys. So that was that one. And I thank you. And you can take out whatever you want to, or put in what you want to, or ask me to something else. I don't care. Wanting me to talk about.
I wondered, well, let's see, a couple things. When the women had had babies, I wondered if you could just back up and talk again about how they were taken to St. Luke's and how long they stayed there, and that you went with them.
Yeah, they won't.
That again.
Yeah. Okay.
Just put a little more detail in it.
Okay. When the women were taken to St. Luke's Hospital to have their babies, I stayed with them while they were in their delivery room, back. And as I said, I came back in about a half hour. The women only stayed 1 day, or 2 days at the outside. And I don't think any of them stayed more than 2 days. And then they were brought back here. I went and got them and brought them back here. And now these women didn't have one had one baby, and I think it was, I can't remember exactly. I have her dates in here, but I don't remember. They were not close together. The last one had hers in 65, and Mary had the little girl, in 64. And I think that the first one had hers in 63. She came in the latter part of 62 and had her baby in 63. So they were about a year apart, having their children. And so that's what happened to them. They came home, and there was no one allowed to have children in here, in the women's ward. So that's the law for the mothers to have their families or put them in the children's home or for adoption. And that first one had hers for adoption, because she couldn't do it because the baby had a heart murmur. The other one, Dorothy Clare, was taken home by her grandma. And Mary already had 4 children at home. I don't know exactly what sexes they were, but then she already had 4 children at home. And the last one had the twins. She had a little girl. Her little girl was approximately, I suppose, about 10 years old when she came in with the twins. She was not married to this man. And she made her sweaters for this man. Now, this man was about 5'4", and he weighed maybe 130 pounds with all his clothes on. And she made size 40 sweaters for him. They'd hang down over his head and make almost a coat for him. So I'm sure that he sold most of them and put that money back into her account, because that's what happened they always wanted to know what they did with their money. What they did with their money was institution furnished the materials for their dresses, but did not furnish any underwear for the women. The girls all made their dresses. And this girl whom I told you lied a lot, she was an excellent seamstress. She used to make her dresses pretty by putting a little bit of lace on them, or a collar, or putting a sleeve in it. But she always made a waist. They had nothing but just sack dresses before. And for many years, just sack dresses. And they asked her if she'd make them for her. Then she said, no, but I'll show you how. So there was another learning experience for people. And there was some in here that didn't have a brain one when it came to sewing. They knew absolutely nothing about it. So that's what happened and then they would want underwear, and then it would come out of their account. I would go downtown and buy it. And they'd want a yarn, I'd go to town and buy their yarn, and there again, that would come out of their account. Anything things they wanted to buy for Christmas to send home for their families, then I could go downtown and buy that, and it would come out of their account. So their money was well spent most all the time. These girls were never not busy because they did all kinds of crafts as well as crocheting and knitting. So that about fixes that part up for you.
Yep.
Okay, that's it.
Well,
Huh?
when women had visitors, where did they visit? Did they?
It had to be in the visitors' room over there. They didn't come here. It was over in the visitors' room, the main visitors' room, where the bathrooms are now, was the visiting room for inside and over here. And there was a big long table right down the middle of that room, and with the wire on it. And there was a desk at this end. That was also the mail person, the guard, or whoever was doing the mail. I censored the women's mail, and then there's a man censored the men's mail. So that's where that desk was. Now you can put it the way you want it, anytime, anyway, anyhow. Since it doesn't matter, I interrupted myself. But you know that we didn't take that much. We didn't take too long.
No,
we
not
didn't.
at all.
We didn't start until
A while
about
more?
yes, as far as I'm concerned.
Just a second, before we do.
It's on.
Yeah, okay. You talked about some of the crimes that the women were in for,
Yes.
but I was wondering if you had an opinion, sort of generally speaking, did they end up here because they were unlucky, because they weren't too smart, because they ended up with the wrong kind of people?
Well, the one that got in here for a bad check that I told you about, she just needed some more alcohol for herself. And she don't know when she became she knew when she became an alcoholic, or thought she was. But see, they found out after she was married she was not an alcoholic, even before she was married. And there's some nice things I like to say about her. When she was first put on parole and started at Kinman Business University, her parole officer would come to her every so often, and she'd say, "Anna, would you go to an assembly at such and such a high school?" And I would tell her, "Sure." She would tell her, "Sure." And she said, "I want you to tell them what you were in the penitentiary, how come you were in the penitentiary, and how come you're an alcoholic." And she said, "Sure." So she would get up and be introduced, and first thing she would tell children, she would introduce herself, and then she would say, "What would the number 11767 mean to you?" So they guessed everything, addresses, car license, everything. She said, "No, that was my registry number in Idaho State Penitentiary. I am an alcoholic." And she got their attention by saying I was in penitentiary. And then she said, "I am an alcoholic." Then she had their attention. So consequently, then she could go on with how she come to be an alcoholic. And that's what she did while she was there. And now the other girls, now this one girl that had the twins, she was in here for a bad check charge, and this was her third time in. She was in here in 59, again in 63, she went out in 64, and 65 she was back in pregnant. And on the same check charge, bad checks, insufficient funds. I think she did it on purpose or something, I don't know. She didn't mind it in here. And I tell you one thing, I never had any problems in here. Well, I better not tell that. But no, I don't think I'd better tell that. Not when it's going to go in a movie. No way. No, I think not. But I only had very, very few. I had one lady here who had been in the Army, and she she was in here on bad check charge. But she had had discipline, and she was a secretary to a general in Japan, over in Tokyo, Japan. And so there was no men around anywhere within 200 miles. And there was all these nurses and all the clerical workers, all women. And so consequently, they got bored. And so anyway, she told me, she says, I am what I am, Mrs. R. And I said, she said, I just wanted to tell you. I said, I'm glad of it. I says, you can do my job for me. I said, for instance, will you be the monitor for all their squabbles when I'm not here? She sure. And so she took care of all of that. And I never had no homosexuality here because she took care of that. I never had any in here. No problems whatsoever. And not like you couldn't walk in the yard. Guards had to go out and clear the yard for us to go in to have the girls' pictures taken and their fingerprints done, because that was where it was, right under the dining hall. And so that's what we never had no problems. I got along very well with my girls. We seemed to have, some of them really didn't really like me, but they never mistreated me or never treated me with disrespect. So I say I had a very good rapport with most all of my girls. And I think that would about cover it for you.
What about, can you describe what kinds of things they'd keep in their cell? What kinds of personal possessions they'd have?
Personal possessions was their yarn, their cosmetics, whatever they had, their toothbrush and all the normal cosmetics. And then they would have boxes up on top of the shelf in the back part of the cell, and I would go through those boxes about once a month. Not each cell in routine. I'd go one sometime and one another time, but sometime during the month I'd go through all of them and see that there was no contraband. And I never found any contraband in 6 years. Either they were awfully good at hiding it, but I never found any. And but they kept their supplies up there. And see, everything had a place to be put. Now, if this woman was knitting on a sweater, it had to be put away when she went in her cell. If she wanted to knit while she was in her cell, that's fine too, but it had to be put away before morning or by morning. And so everything had a place in the cell, and everything had to be put in its place. So that's why what they did with the things in their cells. They had their dresses and their underclothes and their sheets and pillowcases for their bed. They had a change of that, and they had a blanket, and sometimes they made spreads for themselves. And so consequently, they had those in the chests of drawers. And then that's where their underwear was kept. That's where their blouses were kept. The like T-shirts, they were kept in that. And their blouses were hung up with their dresses. But you take 12 dresses in that little space about this wide, and it doesn't make room for anything else. And then right at the end, the two chests of drawers are sitting like this, and right at the end of the chest of drawers is where the toilet is. And there's a little curtain that goes around that for privacy. And so that's what happens in the cells. And they had to have everything clean. I was a stickler for that. And I had some women in here who'd never done any housekeeping. They were just plain sloving. Well, they wasn't sloving very long, because not only would I tell them, but so would their cellmate. So I think that's it. I don't know of anything else you could ask for. I don't really.
Let's see, that went through a bunch. Yeah, we did cover a lot of topics.
Huh? So now see, it's all mixed up. It's not in order. Now you can put it in order, whatever
Well, yeah.
order you want to put it in. Whether it looks all right, whether it doesn't. Me?
To answer some more questions.
Yes.
I don't know whether, I have some more things that I'm curious about, as long as we're
Fine.
all set up here. about your husband and what positions he
Oh.
worked in the Maine prison, and you lived down on
Oh,
50th
yes, I did.
Street, and what that was like, and what Clapp was it like to work with.
Oh, well, Clapp was a very good friend of
Are
ours.
we going? Okay.
My husband worked here also. In 1957, my husband was in an accident in a planer mill in California, and he lost his left hand. And so consequently, in 3 years after that, he started having the phantom pains that usually amputees have. But not only that, he wouldn't slow down with working. Now, he was working in this, where they sawed the lumber to make, it was in a box factory, and they did that, and they were making lettuce crates at this time, this one particular time. And he came home at lunchtime almost in tears. He was in so much pain. I said, "What did you do today?" I said, "How much did you do today?" And he had handled 1,900 linear board feet of lumber. He was going from two cutoff saws. Two saws were cutting these little pieces of lettuce crates. Some was the ends and some was the side slats and what have you. But he was in pain. And I said, "You call up that place and quit right now. You don't have to have that pain. You aren't going to have it." And he said, "But Mommy, I got to work." I said, "There's only the two of us. You don't have to work." I said, "We can get by very nicely, but I got to work." I said, "All right, why don't you call Lou Clapp and find out if he has anything up there you could do?" And so consequently, he called Lou. And Lou says, "Well, come on up." And he says, "No, I have lost my left hand. I wear a hook." And he says, "Doesn't make any difference to me. You just come on up." And after he got here, and he was in interviewing him, he said, "Well, you can still shoot, can't you?" And Joe says, "Yes, I'm still marksman expert." He said, "I can shoot it, and it's as good as I ever did." And they used to be on the range. They used to go out on the pistol range together. My husband was on the police force, and he was on the sheriff's force. Gee, it's getting too hot up there for that, isn't it?
Is it doing?
It must be cloudy. So he came up to see Mr. Clapp, and Lou took him all around the place, and he says, "I want you back here at such and such time." He says, "Now, I want to tell you this." He says, "If a con has his arm around my throat with a knife at my throat," he says, "you shoot that SOB right through me if you have to get him." I said, Joe says, "Yeah, I know." But he would never done it. There's too many other ways of getting a person's head, an arm, or anything else when you don't have to bother the one in front of him. So anyway, he came up and they put him on this tower, the two tower, and then he alternated with one tower. And he worked the afternoon shift and the graveyard shift. But not two. His mostly was daytime and afternoon, mostly afternoon. So consequently, though he came off the wall after they had the men all locked up inside, and he'd go inside and do his rounds then, after the men were all locked up in their cell houses. Then after that, when I came up here, and I was working at St. Al's Hospital on 5th Street, and he said to Lou said to my husband, he says, "What do you think Lulu would take Mrs. O'Neill's place?" He says, "I don't know. It's none of my business. You have to ask her." And so Lou called me and asked me if I'd come up, and I said, "Sure." And when I came up, he asked me if I'd take over for Mrs. O'Neill, and I said I'd love to. And I never regretted the day I came up here to work. Never. We had uniform. I had a uniform. I wasn't dressed like this then. I had a uniform. And I weighed 225 to 230 pounds. I was 5'6.5". I'm 5'5" now and weigh 180. But it does make a difference when you're in uniform. I mean, I showed where I was big. I wore a size 42 bra. And I was a big lady. And I had been big most of the time since I stopped having children. The last time with my last baby, I weighed 225 when she was born. And with the twins, I gained 50 pounds. I weighed 170 or so when I had the twins. And then when I had the next one, I never went down under 180 for a long time. And finally in 1973, I went to Weight Watchers and went down to 170. And I stayed that way for about 5 years. And then I got ill. I had pneumonia when I worked here. And I was taken to the hospital, and I didn't care whether school kept or not. And so while I was there, I asked the doctor if he would do a glucose tolerance test on me, because my father had 2 sisters who were diabetics. So I had that done, and that was found I was borderline diabetic. So he put me on medication and on a diet, and I stayed on the diet. And for 3 months, I took a whole tablet of Oronase, and I lost 50 pounds. So then he put me on a half a tablet, and another 3 months, and lost another 30 pounds.
What did your uniform look like?
Just like the men's uniform, like that uniform that's over there. It shows the men's uniform in 1961. That's more or less like mine was. I made my own, but that's the way it was, and that's the kind of material it was. And I had a skirt and a uniform top, and I had my badge just like anybody else did. My husband carried. I still have the piece of leather that my husband had his pinned on, and he had it on his belt. But that's how I got to be here. That's how I came in the first place, through my husband and Mr. Clapp. Now, we knew Mr. Clapp because when my husband was working on the police force and Mr. Clapp was a sheriff's officer, his children brought the measles home to him, and he took them. And so he called Joe and asked Joe if he would take his place for him while he had the measles, because he was quarantined. So that's really how we got very well acquainted. Joe was very acquainted with him, but I became very much acquainted with Robin and the 2 kids. But they didn't remember me after we came up here, because I was a big lady then, and I wasn't a big lady when they knew me. Well, I was big, but not that big. And so consequently, I've known Jerry Clapp and Marilyn all their lives. And so, and Jerry knows me, but I don't think Marilyn would know me if she was to see me, because she was a little girl and she had problems when she was a child. She had to go to, I think it was her, or maybe it's Jerry's child. But anyway, she was quite a nice little individual now. Her daddy was 6'3", and he weighed right around 200, 190, 200, and that was Lou Clapp. And his mother, I think that she was at least 5'11". She was tall and quite slender. And Marilyn is tall and heavy. And Jerry is very tall. He was 6'4". He's a court reporter downtown in one of the big courts. I don't know which one of the courts it is, but he's still working there. And so they've all have their own. Marilyn has never been married, but Jerry's married and has a family. So that's how we knew Mr. Clapp, and that's how I come to be here, is through my husband and through our knowledge of Mr. Clapp and friendship for years ago, 1942.
What was it like living down on Goodman Street in the house?
Oh, yes, so we had nice, I don't know whether I have them with me or not. I did have them. I had pictures. The house that we moved into down there, when I took a picture when I went there, and that house looked like one of the old houses in the movie Grapes of Wrath, one of those tumble-down things and yards all up around it, and lilacs and lilac bushes, and what was the other one? Oh, roses. Lilac bushes alternated all down, and they were all wired together down the fence. I had one heck of a time getting rid of that bunch of stuff. And then I had what looked like after they did. They put a nice porch on it, put an extra room out on the front, either for me to use as my sewing room or a library. And then they had 2 bedrooms and a bath between, and a nice living room and a kitchen. And they fixed it up more modern. They put that when Joe said he went down there, they had 1 pull chain in the middle of the room, no outlets, 1 pull chain, and they had those plug-ins, you know. They had one up there and plug in there, and the wire went over like this and down to whatever they wanted. These people had lived in that house for 20 years, and when he retired, why, they got out of it, and that it was almost this thing of, if it hadn't had a good foundation, why, they wouldn't have gone ahead and redone it. But they rewired it, and they did the plumbing all over, and they put new siding on the outside, and it was really a pretty nice little house. And I had a nice place for a garden in the back, and that's where I lived. And that was the second house. There was the 1 house, and we lived in the second house, and there was 3, 4, 5 houses there. And Big John Williams, who was head guard for the dining room, he came to work the same year my husband did. And he was head of the dining room, and they lived up in number 5 house, right under number 6 tower down there. And then when they decided to move the houses, why, then we moved out of that and we bought a mobile home and put it on the first pad. They had 4 spaces for trailers there, and we took the first one. So that's how I come to be living around here even. Now you got a good job ahead of you, young Mela.